So we are going to get into the presentation. This is called Politics, What They Didn't Want You to Know. When I started PANDA, we went from about 1 to 75 chapters in under a year. And I thought that that was advancing, we were being a bigger organization, we were spreading the message, we were educating a lot of people, and we decided we're going to launch something called Operation Homeland Liberty. So at January 1st, 2013, we launched Operation Homeland Liberty. The idea was to defeat the NDAA in all 50 states at the state legislature by the end of the year. Not exactly a lofty goal. But we introduced that year about introduced or advanced about 23 pieces of state legislation, saying that you can't indefinitely detain an American citizen without a charge or trial. And throughout that work, we ended up, it was about September of 2013, I flew out to this little conference in San Diego called Libertopia. I flew out to Libertopia, and at the end, not a single piece of legislation that we had authored, advanced, or pushed, worth anything, was signed by the governor. California signed a law, we called it the Swiss cheese with holes drilled through it. Alaska signed a law basically saying, yes, there is due process. Wow, thank you, that's helpful. But really, we had come to that point and it was, I felt like a total failure. I felt like we had encouraged people to meet a goal and we hadn't even had one state to show for it. And I met a guy by the name of Ernest Hancock of Freedom's Phoenix. Does anybody know who Ernest Hancock is? Okay, all right. So in his classic style, Ernest kind of stood there and listened to me talk about PANDA and talk about what we did over the years that we were involved. And he listened patiently for about 10 minutes. And he kind of looks at me. And he goes, so let me get this straight. You're building a big collective to take on their collective, and collectively you're going to defeat collectivism? Okay. I thought a little bit of a sick burn, but he was right. He was absolutely right. And the other shift that really happened, a friend of mine, Tony DeMott from Campaign for Liberty, and I argued over the Colorado Campaign for Liberty had essentially released the cell phone numbers of the state legislators for trying to get them to vote on our bill. And I was told by some state legislators that that was what killed our bill. We lost by 1 vote in the House. That was what killed our bill. And we went back and forth, and he basically laid out, he said, no, this is what got it as close as it did. Because they were able to confront these legislators, they were able to put pressure on them, and even though they didn't like them, that's what forced them to vote the way they needed to vote. And it was those two paradigm shifts that really led to what we decided to term take-back teams at PANDA. And it's these 3 paradigm shifts that I want to go through with you today. Number 1, if you're writing these down, I recommend writing this slide down. From access to power. Number 2, from English to pressure. Number 3, from understanding to fear. And then finally, how to win. I want you to remember one word. If you come away from this presentation with nothing else, I want you to remember one word. What is that word? Repetition. All 5 people. What is that word? Repetition. We are in a war of ideas. Because ideas form policy. Policy then can form ideas, but really at the end of the day, liberty is an idea. And if we are to advance liberty, we need to show people that that idea is what improves their lives. So we need to win the idea war first. That's why we're doing paradigm shifts. That's why we're starting with changing your mentality. You can't necessarily teach someone how politics works in an hour or 2 hours or even a week, but you can start by changing the way you think about how politics actually works. So let's start with what doesn't work. Here's a few examples. Protesting in the streets. Unless nobody has heard of your issue before, in which case you raise a little bit of awareness, how many Ferguson City Council members have been removed from office? Anybody know? Anybody want to guess? Yeah, 0. Speaking with your representatives, sending letters to your representatives. How many of you have ever sent your congressman a letter? What did you get back?
Nothing.
Form letter, email, no response. Please vote for me, right, is what you got back. Meeting with your representatives, trusting anything your representatives say. You're seeing a pattern here. Remember that if you're trying to convince instead of pressure, all you're doing is practicing. And really what doesn't work is treating politicians like normal people. And really the reason why is you get into, going back to reputation, you get into the major difference between politicians and business owners, or politicians and you as a free person. If you as a free person decide that you want to sell a product or to sell a service, those people taking that service from you, those people buying that product from you, immediately if you start abusing your service, you start abusing that authority, you start abusing them, one person alone, just one person can pull their money and that affects your income stream immediately. Yet if you're a politician, it takes 51% of the voting population to even touch you. So when we get into what matters with politicians, we have to stop, I use the example of mousetrap. Most books on politics were written by politicians. Most books on how to engage in politics were written by lobbyists. Why? If you listen to them tell you what to do, they will always win the game. It's like the game of Mousetrap. You guys ever played the game of Mousetrap growing up? A couple people? Okay. If you continue following the path that they laid out for you, they can set all the traps in your way and you'll never get anywhere. I've watched so many liberty activists burn themselves out attempting to use politics the way they normally would. So shift one is access to power. Now, access is how most grassroots activists and how most people who get engaged in politics try to play it. You're very familiar with access. Access is you sit and meet with your politician behind closed doors. Access is you give them a private phone call and try to talk to them about the issue. Access is you hang out at a picnic with their family or you go golfing with the politician. That's access politics. Now, access politics looks like this. Your politician, you call him, he looks. Hey, Joe. Hey, man, how's it going? Oh, man, love to hang out with you. Yeah, let's go golfing next weekend. All right, man, talk to you later. That's access. And why do most grassroots activists go for access? Because they get what they really want. They get banquets. They get press conferences. They get to meet their political heroes. They get every perk of being a part of the current system. But what do they give up? If you're an access activist, you give up the ability to challenge the status quo because that's what got you there in the first place. So now you go to power. Now power activism is a little tougher. It requires blood, it requires sweat, it requires tears, it requires long nights, it requires turning down donors' checks who want to give something to you just to co-opt your movement. Yet what is power? Power is when a good friend of mine, Jason Casella, who lives in Idaho, walks into his city council meeting and demands that they stop passing an Agenda 21 resolution. Anyone familiar with Agenda 21 here, by the way? Several? Okay, all right. So they have received, his city of Emmett, Idaho, had received a smart growth grant of about $117,000 or so. And he walks into the middle of the city council meeting where they're talking about this grant. He stands in the middle of the city council meeting and goes, hey guys, I've got to go. I really have something important to do, but can you hold off this vote for 2 weeks? How many of you, if you did that in your city council meeting, what would they do, laugh at you? Probably. They stopped. They appointed him as a special advisor to discuss the grant, and within 3 weeks they had returned the $117,000 to Smart Growth America. That's what power politics looks like. Power politics is when you call your politician and they look at the phone and they go, oh, it's Steve. I really don't want to talk to Steve. Ring, I don't want to talk to Steve. Really? Hi, Steve, what do you want? You're never going to make friends in power politics with politicians. You're never going to make friends with the political class. In fact, they're probably going to hate you. But if you want to change the status quo, you have to force it. MLK said that freedom is never voluntarily given by the oppressor. It must be demanded by the oppressed. Now, here's a quote. I want you guys to guess where this came from. The thing is, if Bernie Sanders is really grassroots, and he's really there for the people, then he would make room for grassroots movements and not say to the grassroots movements, you need to settle for what I give you. Who said that? Let's take some guesses. Who said that? Not Bernie. Who else?
Donald. Harry Reid.
Not Donald, not Harry. Who else? No, not quite. A couple more guesses. Who else? Who? No, not Bill.
Elizabeth Warren.
Not Elizabeth Warren. Marissa Johnson, Black Lives Matter, Seattle. Anyone remember when Black Lives Matter Seattle interrupted Bernie Sanders and it made a big stink about it in the news? Anybody remember that? A few of you? Okay. Well, Black Lives Matter activists, which cost them probably a couple bus tickets, got into a Bernie Sanders rally and took over the podium from Sanders. And they talked about racial justice issues, and they talked about what affected their movement, and essentially stole the podium from him. Now, could they have been a lot nicer? Could they have been a lot kinder? Could they have been a lot more careful? Sure, there are some things they could have done. However, the Black Lives Matter Seattle activists, and this is probably one of the most disliked videos on YouTube ever. I think it has like 4 likes and 50,000 dislikes. The Bernie Brigade came in. But this here, what did it win them? Just a couple bus tickets and willing to confront their politicians in front of the cameras. What did it win them? So they scored weeks of airtime on racial justice issues. They got both Sanders and the Clinton campaign to release a platform on racial justice for their campaigns. They got Sanders to talk about his racial justice platform at his next speech in front of 28,000 people in Portland. And they were rough, and they were impolite, and they were annoying. How many Bernie supporters do you think gave up on civil rights when BLM interrupted Bernie Sanders? Or gave up on racial justice and stopped caring about other minorities? How many? None? Probably none. Yet they were told, let's go interrupt Jeb Bush. Why didn't you interrupt Donald Trump? Why would you interrupt an ally? Why would you interrupt an ally? Because your ally is going to listen to his supporters. Donald Trump has very few people who support him, who support Black Lives Matter. But Bernie Sanders has an awful lot of people who support him, who support Black Lives Matter. And so what Marissa Johnson and what BLM Seattle understood is that when it comes to politics, no matter how friendly they are, you have to play power politics. And a cardinal rule, and I talked about this in my speech this morning, a cardinal rule is you must keep your closest friends and the politicians you like the most accountable. Because they are the only people who will listen to you. Has anyone ever sent a letter to John McCain on Syria? Okay, good. There was a lot of people who did. And how did he respond to those letters? By playing solitaire in a hearing on going to war in Syria. Shift 2, English to pressure. English, do they speak it? Well, not really. They don't speak English. And when someone walks into politics and tries to convince a politician that they are right, and show a politician and reason with a politician and show them that their issue is important and they want to pass this issue, what they're really doing is they might as well be speaking English in China. They might as well be speaking English in India. And they want these politicians to understand them. They want these politicians to learn their language. Would you go to a foreign country and force everyone around you to learn your language? I don't think so. And yet most people go into politics with this idea that you're just going to reason with a politician. Well, let's examine that a little bit more. Most humans react to pressure. We call it peer pressure. Most humans react to that pressure, but politicians react to it much more. Why? Well, is anyone familiar with the soup Nazi from Seinfeld? Okay, all right. So the soup Nazi in Seinfeld has probably the worst service on the face of the planet. He treats his customers quite awfully, making them stand in line, making them stand still, only move when he says to move, etc., but he has the best soup in New York. And that's why people go to him. So it doesn't matter what his reputation is, he has a product to give. What product do politicians have to give? What's the number one thing that wins an election for a politician, wins or loses? Why do they win or lose an election? What's the number one thing?
Promises.
Promises? No. What else?
Votes.
Vote. How do you get votes?
Money. Personality.
Not just money. Personality is close.
Charisma.
Reputation. Why a sex scandal has nothing to do with policy, has absolutely nothing to do with what that politician has done to your liberty. Why do sex scandals always take down a politician? Because it's about them. It's about their reputation. It's about them as a person. That's what matters to voters. That's what matters to people when they go in the polls, is who are they as a person. You talk to Bernie supporters, what will they say? He cares. Why is it when a little bird lands on Bernie Sanders' podium that he's all of a sudden a more electable candidate? Because he cares. That's why. Donald Trump, why do people vote for Donald Trump? He's a businessman. It's all about the candidate. It's all about the person. So if you want to be effective in politics, you have to be willing to utterly destroy and dismantle every politician's reputation who dares step on your liberty and dares step on your rights. Now, you want to be effective, you have to speak their language. What is their language? Let's go back to Jason. So, you may think that Jason was some hotshot political activist who'd been doing billion trainings and who'd been in activism for 20 years. No, he was new. He was living in South Beach, California, and Orange County, California, and he moves to Idaho to start a farm. And he decides that he wants to fight the NDAA. Well, in Idaho, in this little city of Emmett, he starts going to the city council meetings. Now, I'm not sure if many of you bother going to your city council meetings, but odds are, who attends are a couple of the local people who are involved in politics, 7 people who work for the government, and the city council. No matter how big your city is. It's about how many people attend. And Jason goes there and he meets a local Tea Party group. He starts networking with them. He starts talking with them. He starts engaging with them. And they bring, the first meeting, they bring 2 people, him and this Tea Party group leader. And they talk about the NDAA to these city council people. And the city council people are probably thinking, oh, yeah, that's cool. A couple constituents talking about a federal issue that we're a local level. But the next meeting, they brought 10 people. Now the gears are starting to turn in the city councilor's head. I wonder how many people are involved in this. Why have I never heard of this? And the next meeting, they brought 30 people. So now we've had tripling of the crowd. And now the hall is starting to fill up. And now you're a city councilor and you're thinking, man, I got to be on the right side of these people. I want to make sure I appease them. I want to make sure I'm voting in their way. And the final meeting where they tried to push the resolution to the next year in order to get rid of it. But the final meeting, 85 people out of a 3,000 person town showed up to the meeting. When 85 people in a 3,000 person town show up, that's basically the entire electorate. They passed our resolution 3-2. So Jason then moves on. I talked about the Agenda 21 grant he reversed. And then there's always going to be 1 or 2 politicians who just doesn't get it. And you got to teach them by knocking a few other politicians out of office or them. And there was this one politician who voted against our resolution, who wanted the Agenda 21 resolution. And then he introduced an ordinance that said only city council people can carry in the council chambers. So if you had a weapon, you could not carry unless you were a city council person in the council chambers. That didn't go well. So the political rap sheet of this amazing activist, but started as just a regular citizen, the political rap sheet of this guy, he was asked for an endorsement by the mayor, by a gubernatorial candidate, by an attorney general candidate. How many people had a governor candidate come and ask you for your endorsement in your state? 1. Very nice. Forced to resign. So after going to Emmett, they go to Gem County, Idaho, which is the county Emmett is. About 25,000 people in the county. And they were so successful in Emmett that showing up at Gem County, not only did they have 60 people there, but they actually had city councilors from Emmett show up to Gem County to push this resolution in the county. And the chair of the county commission decides that he doesn't want 60 people in the room. He's not terribly interested in citizen involvement. He only wants 10. So he orders 50 people out of the room before they vote on the resolution. And then because our resolution's on the consent agenda, he accidentally votes for our resolution. After accidentally voting for our resolution, he then realizes this is a great political opportunity for me. So he goes to those 50 people he just kicked out and says, well, you know, I voted for your resolution. And I'm running again for county commissioner, and you should vote for me. Well, 2 weeks later, he resigned. Idaho State Senator Stephen Thane introduced our resolution. Introduced it quite badly. It was obvious that he hadn't read it at all, and he was only responding to pressure from his district, because he goes up to introduce an act, actually, at the state level. He goes to introduce the act, and he's like, Jason, you introduced this. Well, he's not there anymore. Remember one word. What's the one word I want you to remember? Reputation. It's the only thing that matters in politics. Shift 3, understanding your fear. When the people fear their government, there is tyranny. When the government fears their people, there is liberty. Notice how it does not say when a government official sits down with you over a nice cup of coffee, there is liberty. It says when the government fears their people, there's liberty. And when I'll go through this talking about fear and talking about holding your politicians in check and pressuring them and protesting outside their homes, really cool by the way, and going to, actually, this is a really cool trick. You can actually go to your Secretary of State's website and figure out the major donors and a lot of the donors to a politician's campaign. And when they flip-flop, you go by the donors' houses and knock on their door and tell them that this is not the guy you voted for. Works really well. But when I do stuff like this, when I teach people about stuff like this, I get accused of fighting dirty. That you're not being polite. You're not being nice to you. You should respect the office of your representatives and really care about what they're doing. And I liken it to, the founders talked about why we need eternal vigilance. Why do we need eternal vigilance to protect our liberty? Because our elected officials hold the keys to that very liberty. Well, if someone holds the keys to your liberty, that sounds an awful lot like a jail guard to me. And if you imagine a jail guard, and they're consistently beating the prisoners, and beating the prisoners, and beating the prisoners, and taking away their freedom, and starving them for food, and beating the prisoners over and over and over and over and over again. And some of the prisoners start drawing caricatures of the jail guards, characterizing them as fat, as ugly, as stupid. Who's in the wrong there? The prisoners or the jail guards?
Oh, yes.
I would say the jail guards. I would say you have the right to defend yourself from people who are infringing on your liberty, no matter whether they're in a suit and tie or whether they're in a uniform. And when you look at that analogy, you understand that politeness is a tool used by the powerful to manipulate the powerless. Here's an example. If I say, as a politician to you, and I have not, there's so many activists who have been told this. If I say to you, you're being too harsh. You're being too principled. You're really just rocking the boat. And to get this done here, what you really need to do is you need to sit down with each of us. And you need to talk to us about your issue. And you need to explain your issue and how important it is to you. And how important it should be to us. That's how you really do this. You don't want to play this mean, fighting game. I don't know how many activists have been told that have been said, you just don't confront people in public. That's really rude. Don't do that. And what I say to them is, if you tell me what is politeness, then you define it, and you can define it any way you want. If I listen to you when you tell me to be polite, you can define politeness any way you want. You can define me out of being able to pressure you. You can define me out of being able to protect my liberty. Now, go after your representatives. Jokes in the paper, protests at their home, letters to the editor, keeping your allies' feet to the fire. This is really important. The people, talk about this a little bit, the people who are most likely to listen to you are the people who are most likely to have supporters like you. You're at a Libertarian National Convention. And there has been some talk. There are lots of legitimate arguments for each of the candidates here. But there has been some talk about, you need to let the candidate go when they violate a liberty principle, or when they argue they're going to violate a liberty principle, or when they say they're going to violate a liberty principle. And what I say to that is, that's how you lose them to the establishment, is when you let them go. When you say, oh, they're good enough. I like that guy. I voted for that guy. I think that guy has a real chance. Well, all the pressure they have when they're in office, when they're running for office, most of the pressure they have is inside the establishment. It comes from the politicians. It comes from the lobbyists. I spend way too much time in D.C. And in D.C., there's about 99 lobbyists for every citizen who shows up. Who do you think they think the voters are? The lobbyists, the special interests that show up every day, the establishment that shows up every day. So if you don't hold their feet to the fire, remember, you're not voting for a person. Libertarians take a lot of time looking at policy. You're voting for values. You had values that you wanted to advance when you joined this party, when you got involved here. You're voting for those values. And if you let the person cross those values because they just might be good enough, and you don't hold their feet to the fire, when they cross those values, they will become the opposite of those values. They will cave to the peer pressure that's all around them. You have to be the wolves on the outside to essentially keep them to liberty and keep them from being taken by the wolves on the inside. You need to call them out. What is the one word I want you to remember? Shift 3, understanding fear. Now, I have to throw out this disclaimer. It doesn't mean violence. Aggressive violence is immoral, NAP, but it's also stupid. Has anyone ever heard of a martyr? Okay, so a martyr is someone who gives up their life for their reputation. They give up their life for a cause. They give up their life for an idea. It's obviously way more important to give up their lives for the idea, so why would you go after someone's life? Go after their reputation instead. So, how many of us are needed to win? This is a question that gets asked a lot. And you have a lot of people, I talk about the 51% a lot, but you have a lot of people who go, man, you know, I would love to get something done in my community, but there's like 5 of us. And we really can't do anything. You know, we really couldn't make this happen. And on average, I want to cite this is the Foundation for Applied Conservative Leadership statistics. I want to cite some statistics here. If you take the population of your county, your city, your state, and you take 70% of that population is eligible to vote out of 100%. 40% are registered to vote. 20% vote on election day. 7% almost always vote Republican. 7% almost always vote Democrat. Neither politician cares about them. 6% are swing votes. Out of those 6%, 3% on each side, 3% plus 1 is all you need to swing every single election in your jurisdiction on average. 3%. Why are politicians so scared of swing voters? Because they're the 3%. I'll give you an example of this. So how do you get this 3%? How do you get the 3% of the population there? I'll give you an example. So imagine for a second that I'm your county commissioner. And you come up to me and you want to get rid of anti-jaywalking laws. You want to allow people to walk across the street without getting ticketed, or tackled in some cases. So there are 3 of you that come up to me. The first person, person A, you come up to me, you present the resolution. And on that resolution, you say, I want you to do something about jaywalking. You only give me a resolution. What do you think I'm going to do with that resolution? Probably going to throw it in the trash. Trash is a good place for it. Person B comes up to me. And attached to this resolution, they have a Post-it note. And on this Post-it note are the names of 20 voters in my district. What do you think I'm going to do with that resolution? I'm probably going to put it on I might get to it. We'll put it in the maybe pile. How many people do I think are behind you, roughly? 20 to 40, we'll say. Person C knows how this works. They come up to me. Attached to that resolution is a Post-it note, and on that Post-it note are the names of 10 organizations in my district. How many people do I think support you? I have no idea, and it scares the ever-loving daylights out of me. So how do you get this done? You find coalitions in your area. You find groups in your area to represent the 3%. Because if a group has 10 voters and their leader shows up, that's one person who showed up who represents 10 people. If they have 100,000 voters and their person shows up to your city council meeting, that's one person who represents 100,000 people. And that's why it only takes 20 or 30 or 40 or 80 or 100 or 150 people in a city council meeting to force them to change everything they were thinking about. Now, you can't do this alone. So how do you motivate people to get involved with you? How do you motivate people to get involved with your cause? Let's go back to a little bit of basic human psychology. This is a RSA anime by Dan Pink called Drive, The Surprising Truth About What Motivates Us. It's really good. Once someone's basic needs are taken care of, they care about 3 things. Number 1, mastery. The ability to get better and better at a task and be recognized for it. The military does this extremely well. You risk your life, you get a piece of tin foil with a cloth on it. Video game achievements also do this very well. You'll play hours and hours looking at a screen with a bunch of different colors on it, trying to achieve an achievement that gives you literally no real value in real life. 2, purpose. Wikipedia. Wikipedia started because a bunch of programmers decided information should be free. And they gave their time for free to Wikipedia. Why? Because it was a cause larger than themselves. Why are you guys here? Because it's a cause larger than yourselves. And the third thing, the thing that's most often missing when people try to get activists to engage and follow them and work with them, self-direction. Anyone ever heard of Atlassian software? The nerd in the back. I'm with you, it's cool. Atlassian Software, an Australian software company, had what they called a star day, where they'd essentially say, okay, programmers, you can work on literally whatever you want as long as you show us the results at the end of 24 hours. You have full control over the next 24 hours. And they got more bug fixes and more problems solved in those 24 hours than they did throughout the rest of the quarter. Why? Because when people have self-direction and self-ownership, one of the principles of libertarianism, when people have self-direction and self-ownership, they will do more for you and they will do more with you. The next thing you need to remember, this is from Rick Falk-Vinje. Anybody know the Swedish Pirate Party in here? A couple people? Okay. So you really should know the Swedish Pirate Party because they only went from nothing to the largest third party in the world in 8 years. And though they've declined as a party, every single major party in Europe has adopted their platform as their own. How did one of the principles of the Swedish Pirate Party, before we get into the swarm, the lesson here is that no millions of cash in the world, even if you do get them, can repair the damage to your organization if you lose your value base. You have to have integrity. You have to have a set of goals that you stay on, that you keep on, and that you keep driving toward, or people will walk away from you. 5 rules of the swarm. This is how the Pirate Party went from nothing to the largest third party in 8 years. Number 1, every member of the swarm is a leader. This means that when you have an awesome graphic designer on your team, you guys give him suggestions, but you don't vote on the logo. He gets to decide what the logo is. That when you have someone doing your newsletter, you give them suggestions, but as soon as they're ready to go, they run the newsletter. They send the newsletter out. Every member of the swarm is a leader. Number 2, democracy creates losers. Let's go back to the voting example. If you have votes on everything in your organization, we're going to do this, everybody's against, everybody's for, we're going to do this, everybody's against, everybody's for, what happens to the people who consistently lose those votes? They'll walk away from your organization. Number 3, set a vision that'll change the world, set goals that'll change your week. People need something that's achievable in front of them, a weekly goal, a monthly goal, but they also need a vision that will change the world. Don't shoot for the moon. Somebody's already done that. Go to Mars. Set a vision that will change the world. Number 4, you can manage the vision but never the message. If you get successful, people will copy you. People will copy your ideas. People will love your ideas. People will engage with your ideas. Talk to them. Engage with them, but never try to control what they say about it, or you will kill their movement too. 5, give it results to gain control, give it control to gain results. When we were working in PANDA at first, we had a hierarchical organization, and I mean bottom up, not top down. Bottom up organization. What does a bottom up organization do? I call it creating liberty lines instead of bread lines. Why? Because when your local chapter leader wants to use your logo, they have to ask your state chapter leader to use it, and they go up to the national chapter leaders and go, hey, is it okay? And by the time you get down to that volunteer at the bottom, and your state leader was on vacation, the volunteer at the bottom is like, where's my logo? I quit. I'm done. Give up control to gain results. If you want control, you will lose results in a volunteer organization. You are not giving them a paycheck at the end of the day. So they are not coming to you for a paycheck. They're coming to you for those 3 things: mastery, purpose, and self-direction. If you want them to engage with you, you have to engage with those things. Now, case study, Kodiak, Alaska. Kodiak, Alaska is a little island with about 3,500 people, and they've had no political activity since 1997, before I went up and did a 2-week training. They had less than 6 months of preparation for a new Agenda 21 inspired code, zoning code. And during this time, they got a little busy. They introduced NDAA resolution, which only went down by 1 vote, and it went down because in the county, or the borough as they call it, they introduced what we called the Be Nice to Politicians bill. And the Be Nice to Politicians bill essentially said that if you address this borough, that you can't insult any of the borough assembly members, you can't accuse any of the borough assembly members of being involved in anything, you have to speak directly to the borough assembly instead of the crowd, and you can't accuse the borough assembly members of, I think it was violating people's rights or anything like that. It was interesting. And that resolution was introduced by a borough assembly member who was supposed to be state rep. She was going to the top, she was going to state rep, it's all good. Well, there was an election coming up, and the citizens of Kodiak absolutely toasted her. She lost her election by 3-1. They kicked out 3 of the borough assembly members before this. They kicked out 2 of the city council people before this. So they get to this draconian code, and essentially the city of Kodiak, or the borough of Kodiak, which is an Alaskan fishing community, had hired a Seattle code developer to take the Seattle zoning code and apply it to Kodiak. Paid him like $170,000. And this Seattle zoning code had things like, it created a new department with absolute unquestionable authority over property decisions. It had severe limits on fencing, fishing equipment, yard maintenance, noise and domestic animals. You couldn't have more than 6 chickens. You couldn't have fishing equipment in your yard in a fishing community. You had fences only so high on the corner and only so high on the street. And it was a $200 daily fine per violation, with a 30-day limit that if you didn't pay within 30 days, you would lose your property. They would put a lien on your property. And if you're a fisherman, you might be out on the water for longer than 30 days. You might leave, not be aware you're in a violation, and come back and your house has a lien on it. So we started by helping Grassroots Kodiak alert the community. We sent out these postcards, Red Alert Kodiak. Sent these out to all 3,500 homes in Kodiak. We also published a satire supporting this code. And we didn't think the newspaper, the only newspaper on the island, would publish it, but they did. And it is Kodiakans need new borough code in Peterson. One of the highlights. It's time for people to stop being so worried about their property rights and start thinking about what's best for the community. So, at the first meeting, zoning commission meeting, which usually accounts for politicians and about 2 tumbleweed, roughly. That's who shows up. At that meeting, over 300 people, 1/10 of the population of the island, showed up to that meeting. Here's some pictures. This is the hallway outside of the city council meeting. This is a better picture. This is the hallway outside of the zoning commission meeting. The meeting itself only held about 60 people, their meeting room. So this hallway is packed, and the door in the back there leads outside into freezing rain, and there were people standing in the parking lot waiting to get in. There were 69 speakers against the code and Peterson. And politicians don't learn very quickly. So they decided, well, we're going to have another meeting, and we're actually going to vote on this now. And the day before that meeting, the newspaper, which had published the satire, published a front-page article saying, "Citizens win," that the code had been defeated. It was an absolute blatant lie. And what it was done is to prevent citizens from showing up to this assembly meeting in the biggest building on the island. Even with that blatant lie on the front page of the newspaper in the biggest font I've seen in my entire life, the over 450 people showed up to this borough assembly meeting and shot down the code. That code has been, this is a picture. That is their auditorium. That's the biggest building on the island. There's not a single seat left in the entire building. That code has been indefinitely suspended. It will not go anywhere. They will not go back against the citizens of Kodiak, Alaska. So how did they win? Number one, from access to power. Kodiak residents did not sit down with their borough assembly people and city council people and try to convince them not to do this. Not once. Instead, from English to pressure, they showed up and they were rolling deep. They showed up in force. It was a complete shock to literally the entire zoning commission when that many citizens showed up to that meeting. Number three, understanding the fear. They focused on the one thing politicians care about, reputation. Although I did hear a few murmurs of putting certain people out in crab cages and forgetting about them. So you look at the political rap sheet of this Kodiak group, Grassroots Alaska. They kicked one state rep, 2 city councilors, and 3 borough assembly persons out of office. And it started with one guy on a fishing boat who listened to the radio. Kodiak residents then used swarm intelligence to protect their liberty. Remember we talked about don't try to control the message, only the vision? This group, halfway through their fight, split. Half the people believed it was Agenda 21, half the people didn't. They were both against the ordinance, but they split. And because they were trained, because they knew that swarm intelligence protects their liberty, and they were not going to control the message, they decided not to fight each other. And they decided that though they were not necessarily going to speak to each other, and they were going to be separate, because oh, all the crazies over here, right? They were going to be separate. They worked together to defeat the ordinance. So how do you win? Shift your thinking, access to power, English to pressure, understanding to fear, control to results. Number 1, you educate yourself. Number 2, you create a goal. Number 3, commit yourself. 4, define your market. 5, build coalitions. 6, prepare for confrontation. And then inspire a swarm. Now, over the years, several organizations have been teaching this type of training, including the Foundation for Applied Conservative Leadership and some others. And we've been effective enough that the IRS has been sicked on the organizations. And now as the Tax Revolution Institute, keeping the IRS accountable and full of transparency, we really are concerned about this new IRS rule that's coming down, and I'm really going to ask for your help defeating this. Essentially, who's familiar with the targeting scandal in 2013? Okay. So in 2013, the IRS targeted various conservative and some progressive groups for their political beliefs and tried to keep them from getting nonprofit status, which is why most citizens don't really engage in politics, so they can't get a nonprofit. There's so much liability there if you can't get a nonprofit, so they'll get a nonprofit. And the IRS was taken to the woodshed by Congress and decided that, well, they actually didn't do anything wrong. That instead, they had interpreted the law correctly. And they're going to release a regulation to make it clear that they interpreted the law correctly. And this regulation essentially cuts citizen activism off at the knees. There are 86,000 advocacy 501c4 organizations around the country. They consist of 100 members to 500,000 to 1 million members. People like the NRA have an advocacy organization. People like all various organizations have advocacy groups, and most of them are out there protecting the citizens and fighting for the citizen. And what this rule would prevent, clearly identified means the name of the candidate involved appears. They could not even name a politician or their voting record within 90 days of an election. They could not have a photograph or drawing of the candidate appears. They couldn't apparently identify the candidate, and they couldn't even reference an issue or characteristic that the candidate might be associated with. This bans voter registration drives. This bans most types of political activism that's effective where you have to call the politician out. And it's not just federal. It's federal, state, local, general, special, primary, or runoff elections. Essentially, any election. And the Treasury Department and the IRS intend that content previously posted by an organization on its website that clearly identifies a candidate and remains on the website during that election period would be a violation of their nonprofit status. It's not just during the 90 days of election. It's if you ever talk about a politician, you have to remove it while they're running for office. So the IRS is essentially attempting to say, you can have free speech, but you can't have any speech we deem political. And they're attempting to re-level the playing field and give the big corporations and special interests a huge advantage again over citizen activist groups. This rule will be funded in October if Congress does not act. Remember, this is a federal agency. They have the authority to issue clarifications to rules. Congress defunded this rule until October, but there's a lame duck session coming up. And Congress may essentially eliminate the effectiveness of just about every activist group I've ever trained or ever been involved with. So we have some material in the back on this. The website is taxrevolution.us, or look up the Tax Revolution Institute. Any nonprofits you know, any advocacy organizations you know. The IRS even thought about applying this to 501c3s. That includes universities. That includes educational institutions. That includes all manner of charities. And I'm astounded by this attack on free speech that the IRS is attempting to push. We're pushing back against the IRS. We're leading the fight to prevent them from instituting this rule. You know any nonprofit organizations at all, you're involved in any nonprofits, please let them know. We have a coalition letter that C3s can sign and that C4s and everyone else can sign. We have a table downstairs for the Tax Revolution Institute. Please get the word out and help us protect citizen activism in the United States. Last thing. I've spoken at various places, but one of the more interesting places I've ever spoken at was the Million Mask March in DC with Anonymous. And everyone familiar with the movie V for Vendetta?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. So newsflash, that's not how revolutions work. Revolutions don't work when a bunch of people pour into the streets and demand something. You guys know Egypt's Arab Spring. The first dictator they kicked out, Muammar Gaddafi, I believe. And then the next dictator who came in was Mohammed al-Morsi, and he was even worse. And these are the largest protests in the history of the world. And then they kicked out Morsi again, and who do they have? General Fattah el-Sisi, who is the general for both, who was Mubarak, Hosni Mubarak, and Morsi. And he's even worse. In fact, they just sentenced some journalists to prison, and the evidence they presented was a YouTube video of a horse running. That doesn't work. What does work? What does work is one citizen at a time deciding to stand up and not wait till all the lights are green and not wait till all the people around them decide to care and not wait till their friends and neighbors decide to care about the issue they care about. They stand up, they start talking to other people, they start engaging their friends and family, they start engaging other activist organizations, they start getting involved in party politics, they start getting involved in the voting system. That's what makes a change, is one person. This young man is August Landmesser. August Landmesser had a Jewish girlfriend, refused to salute Hitler. An absolutely famous case. I think he was eventually killed in the war, and she was eventually dragged off to the camps. But it's that kind of courage right there that inspires millions. It's that kind of courage that starts revolutions. It's that kind of courage that moves forward. If you want some help, if you run an activist group, you want help from the Solutions Institute, I also have some sign-up sheets from them. They're a really great activist training center. I have some flyers in the back. You can put down your cause, put down your name, put down what you want. But overall, really, I want you to be an effective force for liberty. I want you to go out and take on every politician. I want to see them dropping like flies everywhere. I want to see when a liberty politician dares to say something against liberty and they shut the power off on me. When a liberty politician dares to see something and say something against liberty, I want to see them back down immediately, and I want to see them issue more of a mea culpa than Vicente Fox issued to Donald Trump on the wall. That's what I want to see in the libertarian movement in the United States today. So thank you very much. Now supposedly we have a Q&A. If you guys want to ask me some questions, I'm happy to answer them. But other than that, you guys have a great rest of the convention.